And the Africa Confidential is saying the end games in Harare and Khartoum are likely to play out with little outside intervention, which is not going to be helpful. Interesting article they've written, Africa in 2019, the youngest continent fights back. There are clear parallels between the wave of protests demanding radical change across Africa this month with the early days of the North African revolt in 2011, known as the Arab Spring. In most cases, those protests had brought together activists outside traditional party and civic structures. Mostly under 30, the protesters were angry and brave, using digital technology as an organizational tool. They were taking on some of the world's most ruthless security states. That is true for the current protests against economic devastation in Sudan and Zimbabwe, as well as misrule in Congo, Kinshasa, and Uganda. And as the anger of the youth grows in Tanzania and Zambia, the grip of their security forces will be tested too. For today's dissenters, there are some harsh lessons from the 2011 wave. Most of the bright hopes of those determined protests in 2011 in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and the milder ones in Algeria and Morocco were snuffed out within a year. After regime change, Egypt reverted to ultra-authoritarianism, and Libya is being ripped apart by rival militias. In 2019, as in 2011, the spark for revolution has been anger at weak and badly managed economies run for the benefit of vested interests in business and the military. The free market mantra has little relevance in the many African regimes where public assets have been taken over by local and foreign private companies, either covertly or in some rigged privatization processes. This is the background to the disputed elections in Congo-Kinshasa, whose official results could allow outgoing President Joseph Kabila and his allies to rule by proxy and maintain a restless grip on the biggest reserves of cobalt. That helps to explain strong support from China and Russia for Kabila's negotiated election victory with Felix Tshisekedi, the more pliable of the two opposition frontrunners. It explains the lukewarm backing for fair and transparent elections by the European Union and the United States, feeling threatened by Beijing and Moscow's support for autocrats. Western governments are reluctant to make new enemies in Africa. That is another brutal lesson for young dissidents in Africa. For regimes that slaughter their own people, the risk of sanctions is diminishing. On top of that leaching away of national resources, Africa's economy is still projected to grow on average by 4% a year by the African Development Bank's optimistic statisticians. We'll have to navigate a downturn in the global economy. Sudan and Zimbabwe, it was the combination of state-imposed price hikes, worsening inflation, currency crisis, rampant corruption, and a political security cabal operating with impunity that led to open revolt. The endgames in Harare and Khartoum are likely to play out with little outside intervention. That took me back to the famous refrain in the streets of Tunis, "We're not afraid, we're not afraid. We are afraid only of God." That's the tipping point moment. That was in Tunis after the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi on the 17th of December 2010, which became a catalyst for the Tunisian revolution.